You're the strong one. You're the strong one. You'll be fine.
My father stood in our front doorway holding a single duffel bag, the only belongings he'd decided I was allowed to take with me, and told me, with a calm finality that still echoes in my memory even now, that I needed to leave that same night, that this was for Callista's sake, that I was the strong one and would be fine wherever I ended up. I was 18 years old, 3 weeks past graduation, and I had just spent the previous evening confronting the son of my parents' closest family friends after learning what he'd done to my younger sister at a party months earlier, something Callista had confided in me in tears, something our parents apparently already knew and had chosen to quietly bury rather than address. Stick with me, because the family that discarded me that night to protect a predator's reputation had no idea exactly how completely I would eventually, permanently upend everything they'd sacrificed me to preserve. My name is Bronwyn Ashdown. I'm 29 years old, and the night my parents put me out of our family home with nothing beyond a single duffel bag represents, even now, the clearest, most devastating turning point of my entire life. A decision they framed as protecting my younger sister but that actually represented something considerably more calculated and cowardly, protecting their own social and business relationships with a prominent local family whose son had assaulted my 17-year-old sister at a party I hadn't even attended. My parents, Garrison and Phoebe Ashdown, had built a comfortable, socially connected life throughout our small town, my father's landscaping business depending significantly on contracts with several prominent local families, including, most significantly, the Whitlock family, whose son Marcus had assaulted Callista during a party the previous spring, an assault Callista had confided in me tearfully roughly 2 weeks before that devastating night, information I would soon discover our parents had already known about for months, choosing quiet, calculated silence over any genuine protection or advocacy for their own daughter. I confronted Marcus directly the day after Callista's devastating confession, a confrontation that quickly reached his own parents, and subsequently mine, triggering the exact chain of events that would end with my own parents choosing to sacrifice me entirely rather than risk any disruption to their carefully maintained business relationship with the Whitlock family. Callista, 17 at the time, 4 years younger than me, had always maintained a particularly close, protective relationship with me throughout our entire childhood. A closeness that had only deepened following our own complicated family dynamics, our parents maintaining a household atmosphere that always felt, even before that specific devastating incident, considerably more focused on outward appearance and social standing than on genuine emotional attunement toward either of us. I remember the specific evening Callista finally confided in me about what had happened at that party, sitting together on my bedroom floor, her voice shaking as she described Marcus Whitlock's behavior in careful, halting detail, explaining that she'd never told our parents directly because she'd overheard them, weeks earlier, discussing keeping things smooth with the Whitlock family regarding an upcoming business contract renewal, a comment that had convinced her, even at 17, that whatever had happened to her would somehow become secondary to our family's financial relationship with the people responsible. I felt something shift permanently within me that specific evening, a fierce, protective anger unlike anything I'd previously experienced throughout my entire relatively sheltered upbringing, understanding clearly that I couldn't simply allow this situation to remain buried the way Callista's own fear suggested our parents had apparently already decided it should. I confronted our parents directly the following morning, demanding to know whether they genuinely already knew about Marcus's behavior toward Callista, watching their careful, evasive responses confirm exactly what Callista had suspected. They'd learned about the incident weeks earlier through a mutual family friend, and had made a deliberate, calculated decision not to address it directly, precisely because of the business and social complications doing so would inevitably create. I made the decision, against my parents' explicit, panicked objections, to confront Marcus Whitlock directly, driving to his family's home the following afternoon and demanding he acknowledge, directly and honestly, exactly what he'd done to my sister, a confrontation that quickly grew heated once Marcus's own dismissive, entitled response made clear he genuinely believed his family's social standing rendered him essentially immune from any meaningful accountability. "Your sister's exaggerating," Marcus told me, his voice carrying a casual arrogance that made my own fury considerably more difficult to contain. "Nothing happened that she didn't want to happen," I told him directly, my voice shaking with barely controlled anger, that I intended to ensure genuine consequences followed regardless of whatever comfortable assumptions his family's social position had apparently taught him to expect, a promise that prompted him to call his own parents, who arrived within the hour, considerably more composed and calculating than their son's obvious entitled dismissiveness. Diane Whitlock, Marcus's mother, addressed me with a controlled, icy politeness that somehow felt even more genuinely threatening than her son's earlier arrogance. "I think you should be very careful about the accusations you're making," she told me. "Your family's business depends considerably on our continued relationship, and I'd hate to see that jeopardized over what sounds like simple teenage miscommunication." I left that confrontation with a growing sick certainty regarding exactly how this entire situation would likely unfold once it inevitably reached my own parents directly, a certainty that would prove, within just 24 hours, entirely, devastatingly accurate. My parents learned about my direct confrontation with the Whitlock family within hours, Diane Whitlock apparently calling my mother immediately, framing the entire situation as my own reckless, unfounded accusation threatening their family's crucial business relationship rather than any genuine acknowledgement of what her own son had actually done to my sister. I arrived home that evening to find both my parents waiting, their expressions carrying a controlled panic I recognized immediately as considerably more concerned with damage control than with any genuine advocacy for Callista's actual well-being and safety. "Do you understand what you might have just done?" my father demanded, his voice carrying genuine fury I'd rarely experienced directed toward me throughout my entire childhood. "That contract with the Whitlocks represents nearly 40% of my business income. You just went over there and threatened everything we've built." "He assaulted Callista," I said, genuinely stunned that my own father's primary concern, even now, centered on business implications rather than his own daughter's genuine trauma and safety. "How is that even a question right now?" My mother attempted a more measured approach, though her underlying priorities revealed themselves just as clearly throughout that difficult conversation. "We're not saying what happened to Callista doesn't matter," she said. "But there are more diplomatic ways to handle this than confronting them directly like you did. You've made this considerably more complicated than it needed to be." I recognized, throughout that entire devastating conversation, that my parents genuinely intended to prioritize smoothing over this situation with the Whitlocks rather than pursuing any meaningful accountability on Callista's behalf, a realization that filled me with a specific, growing horror regarding exactly what protecting their business relationship might ultimately require them to do. My parents retreated to their bedroom for a lengthy, tense conversation that evening, emerging roughly an hour later with an expression on my father's face that I recognized immediately as calculated resolve rather than any genuine emotional processing of everything that had actually happened to Callista. "We've decided," he said, his voice carrying a finality that made unmistakably clear this represented an already settled decision rather than any genuine discussion I might still influence, "that it's best if you move out tonight. We think some independence will be good for you. And honestly, keeping the peace with the Whitlocks matters for this entire family's future, including Callista's." I stood there genuinely stunned, processing the specific devastating cruelty of watching my own parents choose to sacrifice me entirely rather than genuinely confront the family whose son had actually assaulted my sister. "You're kicking me out," I said slowly, needing to hear the actual words rather than my father's careful euphemistic framing. "Because I confronted the people who hurt Callista?" My father's expression carried genuine discomfort, though not nearly enough to prompt any reconsideration of the decision he and my mother had apparently already finalized. "You're 18, he said. "You're the strong one, Bronwyn. You'll figure things out and be fine. This is really about protecting your sister's future. And honestly, protecting all of our futures." He handed me a single duffel bag he'd apparently already packed with a modest selection of my clothing, making clear through that specific, calculated gesture exactly how thoroughly this devastating decision had already been planned before I'd even walked through our front door that evening. I left that house within the hour, Callista sobbing quietly in her bedroom doorway, clearly having overheard enough of the conversation to understand exactly what our parents were doing, though she remained too frightened, too accustomed to our family's particular pattern of prioritizing appearance over genuine accountability, to directly intervene on my behalf. I remember the specific, disorienting quality of that first night, driving my modest car toward absolutely no confirmed destination, processing genuine shock and devastation regarding exactly how completely my own parents had chosen the Whitlock family's business relationship over their own daughter's basic safety and belonging within our family. I stayed that first night with a close friend from high school, genuinely grateful for her family's willingness to provide emergency shelter without requiring extensive explanation, though I found myself, throughout those first difficult days, struggling to fully articulate exactly what had actually happened, the specific betrayal feeling almost too devastating to explain coherently even to people who genuinely cared about my well-being. I maintained brief, careful contact with Callista throughout the following weeks, learning that our parents had apparently reached some private financial settlement with the Whitlock family, an arrangement that provided modest compensation while requiring, in return, complete silence regarding what had actually occurred, an arrangement that ensured Marcus Whitlock would face absolutely no meaningful accountability whatsoever for what he'd actually done. I spent that first year following my expulsion from our family home genuinely struggling, working multiple jobs while living in various temporary arrangements, eventually securing stable housing through a program specifically designed to support young people navigating sudden family estrangement, resources I discovered largely through my own determined research and persistence. I enrolled in community college the following year, working steadily while completing my degree, eventually transferring to a state university where I pursued a degree in journalism, drawn specifically toward investigative reporting given my own painful, formative experience witnessing exactly how effectively powerful families could suppress genuine accountability through calculated financial and social pressure. I built genuine, meaningful friendships throughout those difficult years, chosen family who provided the kind of consistent support and genuine care I'd stopped receiving from my own parents the moment protecting their business relationship became more important than protecting me. Relationships that helped me process the genuine grief and anger I continued carrying regarding everything that had happened. I maintained only occasional, careful contact with Callista throughout those years, our relationship remaining genuinely important to me despite the complicated circumstances surrounding our separation, understanding that she herself remained trapped within our parents' household, navigating her own difficult processing of everything that had happened without the genuine advocacy or protection either of us had actually deserved. I built a genuinely successful career over the following years as an investigative journalist, specializing specifically in stories involving powerful families and institutions using financial and social influence to suppress accountability for genuine wrongdoing, work that felt, given my own personal history, considerably more meaningful than simply professional achievement alone. I learned through my own careful, ongoing research roughly 6 years after that devastating night, that Marcus Whitlock had faced at least 2 additional similar accusations from other young women throughout the intervening years, incidents that had apparently been similarly suppressed through the Whitlock family's continued financial and social influence throughout our small town's tightly connected business community. I made the deliberate decision, once I'd gathered sufficient, carefully documented evidence, to pursue formal investigative reporting regarding this specific pattern, working methodically to interview each affected young woman, review whatever documentation existed regarding the various financial settlements the Whitlock family had apparently arranged, and build a comprehensive, thoroughly sourced account of exactly how their considerable influence had repeatedly suppressed genuine accountability throughout recent years. I published that investigative piece through a respected regional publication roughly 7 years after my own devastating expulsion from my family home, an article that detailed with careful, thorough documentation the specific pattern of assault allegations against Marcus Whitlock alongside his family's repeated, calculated efforts to suppress meaningful accountability through financial settlements and social pressure. That published investigation triggered significant, immediate consequences throughout our small town's tightly connected community, several additional young women coming forward once the article's publication provided them genuine confidence that their own experiences might finally receive appropriate attention and accountability. The Whitlock family's various business relationships throughout the community suffered considerably once the full pattern became publicly documented, several previously loyal clients and business partners choosing to distance themselves entirely once the comprehensive scope of Marcus's behavior, and his family's calculated suppression efforts, became undeniably clear through my careful, thorough reporting. My own parents, whose business relationship with the Whitlock family had originally motivated their devastating decision to expel me from our family home, found themselves facing uncomfortable scrutiny of their own, several community members learning, through my article's careful documentation, exactly how my own parents had chosen to sacrifice their daughter specifically to protect that same business relationship, a revelation that damaged their own standing within our community considerably. Callista reached out to me directly once that article published, her voice carrying genuine emotion throughout our subsequent conversation. "I should have told everyone what actually happened years ago," she said. "I'm sorry it took you doing all of this work alone to finally get some real accountability." Standing at a journalism awards ceremony roughly 8 years after that devastating night, accepting recognition for my investigative work exposing the Whitlock family's pattern of suppressed accountability, I thought often about my father's specific words that night, about being called the strong one, as justification for why I could simply be discarded to protect a predator's reputation and my family's business interests. I never fully reconciled with my parents following that devastating expulsion, understanding clearly that whatever explanation or eventual apology they might offer could never genuinely undo their calculated choice to prioritize business relationships over my own basic safety and belonging within our family, a choice that had ultimately cost them considerably more, both financially and socially, than confronting Marcus Whitlock honestly all those years earlier ever would have required. My relationship with Callista rebuilt gradually and genuinely throughout those following years, our shared history of family betrayal creating a particular meaningful closeness that felt, in many ways, considerably stronger than whatever relationship we might have maintained had our parents never forced us into such painful separate paths. I built, ultimately, an entire meaningful career directly from that devastating starting point, understanding that my parents had genuinely believed, handing me that single duffel bag, that they were simply removing an inconvenient complication from their carefully protected life, never anticipating that the daughter they'd so calculatedly discarded would eventually build exactly the kind of platform and expertise needed to ensure the truth they'd worked so desperately to suppress would finally, undeniably reach the light.